All right. So tonight is the second session of our Sadie and Henry Bayer Tanakh class on the topic of the patriarchs. And last week, of course, we looked at the origins of Abraham, his genealogical history, and his geographical history. And today, the story of Abraham starts in earnest, which is to say, what I want to study with you is his movement into the land of Canaan, and the way I want to frame our conversation is to look first at a Rashi, and then make our way through really just the first few psukim of Parshas Lech Lecha to unpack
Yes, it shouldn't
um,
disturb you.
what I consider some of the most important pieces, some of the headlines of Abraham's life. Okay, so let's just jump in for a second and I want to start with the very, very last pasuk of Parshas Noach before we jump in to Parshas Lech Lecha. So if you have a chumash, very end of Lech Lecha, very end of Noach, very beginning of Lech Lecha, and I'll put up the sources on the screen. Hopefully, everyone will be able to see this. Okay. So the very end of Parshas Noach tells us something which doesn't seem to have a lot of significance on its face. Terach lived 205 years, and Terach died in Haran, and you sort of have to wonder, why does that matter? Who cares? Terach is a bit player. We're not going to hear from him again. And why does his life and the length of his days matter? Okay, so park that question in the back of your head, and just quickly, I want to look at the first two psukim of Lech Lecha, and as is our one, I want to make a little trouble and ask a number of questions. So Hashem says to Abraham, you have to leave your country and your homeland and your father's house and go to the land that I'll show you. So my simple question is Lech Lecha. What does that phrase mean? What is it all about? The pasuk should say Lech, go. Lech Lecha, what does it mean that go for you? So first of all, I have two questions about this. I'll make you a great nation, I'll bless you, and I'll make your name great. You will be a blessing. So first of all, you'll be a great nation. We know Jewish history. The Jewish people were never a great nation. Right, so we were always a tiny speck of a side piece of, the joke is if we were in China, so the Jewish population would be like a rounding error. So what's the world population of Jewry? 10 million, 12 million, pick a number, right? It's nothing. So and it's never been. So you're going to be a great nation, we'll be a nation, but a great nation, what is that? And the other question I have from Pasuk Ben is, you keep seeing this word, I'm going to bless you, and you're going to be a blessing. And then the next pasuk, and I'll bless you, or I'll bless those who bless you, I'll curse those who curse you. Everyone will be blessed through you. So very simple question. What does it mean to be a bracha? Right? We throw around the term all the time. What does it mean that Abraham is going to be a bracha? So Abraham starts on the journey, and he takes Lot with him. So why do we care about Lot? Okay, he's going to pop up in the story again, but in principle, why does Lot matter to the story? Last pasuk that I want to look at today. Vayikach Abraham es Sarai ishto ves Lot ben Achiv. He took his wife. He took his nephew. Ves kol rechusham asher rachashu. He took all his wealth. Ves hanefesh asher asu becharan. And the people. He has an entourage. The people that he made in Haran. What does it mean? The people that he made in Haran. Who are they? And why do they matter? Vayetzu lechas artz Canaan. V'yava artz Canaan. And finally, the redundancy in the pasuk. He headed to Canaan. He got to Canaan. So obviously, he headed there. He got there. So why do we need to know? Why do we need to know that detail? Okay, so I have altogether maybe 6, 7 questions that I want to focus on, and I want to begin with a Rashi at the end of Parshas Noah. Okay? I'm not going to pull it up on the source sheet, but I'll read it to you, and you have it on the source sheet if you want to went out in the email, or you have it from the website. If you have a chumash, the very last pasuk in Parshas Noah. So the pasuk had told us that Terach is 205 years when he died. Now listen to this Rashi. Let's learn it together. La'achar sheyatza Avram mecharan uba le'eretz Canaan. V'hayasham yoser mishishim shana. So Terach dies in Haran. When does this happen? This is long after Abraham left Haran and went to Canaan. And the story went on for more than 60 years. So just a little math here. Just follow a drop of math. So how old is Abraham when he starts his prophetic career? 75. Okay, I always like to say, somebody has a big birthday. So, you think you're retiring, you think you're getting 75 is where Abraham started. Okay. So the first 75 years, you're just getting warmed up. 75 is when you finally take off. So he's 75 years. I can make another joke. You talk about the kids who stay at home and they didn't leave home for a long time. So by the time Abraham left home, 75. Okay. The Terach ben Shivim Shana Kishno Abraham. And by the way, the pasuk had told us that Terach was 70 when Abraham was born. Okay, so when we get to the beginning of Lech Lecha, Harei Kuf Mem He LeTerach, Terach is 145. So he lives to 205. There's still 60 more years of Terach's life. Right, the whole of Parshas Lech Lecha, right, Terach is alive and well back in Haran. So Rashi wants to know the lama hiktim hakasuv misa social terach v'yitza social avra. It's out of place. Okay, now it's not technically such a problem. In any narrative, not everything follows a strict chronology. Sometimes you have things that you'll mention in a story because they make sense thematically, even if they're a little out of chronological order. That's not such a terrible crime. But it's conspicuous, right? Why would you report his death 60 years early? Why? So Rashi says, I'll tell you what. This is the part I want to focus on. He says, not everyone would have known the story of Abraham and the fact that Hashem revealed himself and he was on a divine mission. Vayomru, and people might have said, Lo kiyem Avraham es kvod aviv. People might have said, that guy Abraham wasn't too good at kibbud av v'em. Elderly parents, abandoned them. Sheinichu zakein v'halach lo. Said goodbye to his aged father and never looked back. What kind of kibbud av is that? It's totally irresponsible. Lefikach kirau hakasuv meis. So the Torah tells us that Terach died. It's not actually true. Meaning the Torah's reporting this death way before it actually happens, but lest anyone make a mistake and think, Terach was alive all those years. Abraham never once sent him a postcard, never once paid him a visit. Abraham was a failure when it came to kibbud av. We don't want anyone to think that. And so the pasuk goes out of its way to tell us about Terach's death so that we could graduate from Terach and move on to the story of Abraham. Okay. So I just want to unpack this Rashi a little. Okay, and I actually want to share with you an approach which I heard first from Rabbi Daniel Friedman, former resident scholar of the Jewish. And you'll see that it makes a great deal of sense. Right? So, but just to understand Rashi, is it so bad, right? If people would have said, he left his father was an idolater. How much did he owe his father? There was a break in the family. Terach was worshiping idols. Abraham was following ethical monotheism. So he left him, and kibbud av v'em, it hadn't been commanded yet. It wasn't such a virtue. It wasn't so important. Why would it have mattered so much if, in fact, someone came along and said, Avram Avinu, guess what? He wasn't too good at Kibbud Avim. Why is that? Why is that so important? Why does that? Why does that? And what I want to suggest is that what happens at this point in the Torah is functionally a paradigm shift. The Torah, when it introduces Abraham to us, is also introducing a new definition of fatherhood, a new definition of paternity. And when it comes to Abraham and this new chapter in the Torah, paternity stops being about fathering offspring in a genetic way, in a biological way, and it starts being about education. And it starts being about teaching values to the next generation. So if you go back, let's just say to Noah. So what did Noah ever teach his kids? What were the lessons that Noah taught his kids? Zero, right? Survey says zero. There's not any line in the Torah that tells us anything Noah ever said to one of his children. To be a father in Parshas Bereshis, in Parshas Noah, means that you sired a child, that genetically, biologically, you have offspring. That's what it means to be a father, right? Conspicuously, right? Adam names Chava. Why is she called Chava? Because she's the mother of all living people. But Adam is never called Av Kol Chai. Right? He doesn't get that. Moniker, right? Who becomes the Av Hamon Goyim? It becomes Avraham, and that's implied in his name. His name change. The Gemara says you're not allowed to call him Avraham without the hey, because his definition, right, his identity is bound up in his being. And what do we call him? Right, it's Moshe Rabbeinu, and it's Yosef HaTzadik. When it comes to Avraham, it's Avraham Avinu. Right? It's Avraham, our father, Avraham, our patriarch, because he is the father of nations. And again, not just biologically, but there's something much more that is meant. Now, I want to answer the question with which we began about this Rashi, and then I want to develop this theme for a second. It's so important for Rashi to point out that Abraham was not guilty of neglecting the mitzvah of kibbud avim, because now that the Torah is introducing us to Father Abraham, the Torah wants to make absolutely sure that he's never criticized for being some sort of hypocrite. Oh, he's going to be this father figure. What did he do for his father? And look how he neglected his father and never. No one should ever go down that road. No one should ever make that mistake. And so the Torah goes out of its way to record the death of Terach early, Rashi says, to make sure we know and everyone knows this man who's going to be the paradigm of paternity for all time is never mistakenly criticized for not being the excellent son to his own father that he surely was. I want to learn a Mishnah with you in Bikurim, and more importantly, I want to learn a Rambam with you. We'll go a little far afield, and then we'll circle back, and you'll see how it all ties together. Let me put up this. Before I do that, I'll just say the Mishnah. You have it on your source sheet as source number 2, and then we can learn the Rambam together. Okay, so by way of introduction, again, this is a little far afield. There's a mitzvah that the Torah tells us called Bikurim. Okay, we all know the mitzvah of Bikurim. The mitzvah is for a farmer to bring his first fruits to the temple. The season of Bikurim begins with Shavuos. If a farmer in the land of Israel during the times of the temple grows in his field one of the 7 fruits of the land of Israel, then when the time is right, he flags. He puts a little ribbon around his first fruits, and then when the time is right, he brings those first fruits to the temple. We say a Mishnah in davening every morning. There's no shear. You want to bring, 2 olives. You're an olive farmer. You could bring 2 olives. You want to bring 2,000 olives, whatever you want, your discretion. But you have to bring some bikurim to the temple. There's 2 mitzvos when it comes to bikurim. You have to bring the bikurim. That's called havas bikurim, and there's something called mikra bikurim. Mikra bikurim means when you get to the temple, there's a recitation. You say psukim from the Torah. We all know them by heart because we say them at the Pesach Seder. Arami Oved Avi. And the farmer tells a very short snapshot of Jewish history. My father was an Aramean, and we ended up in Egypt. We didn't mean to get there. We became enslaved. We were oppressed. Hashem redeemed us. And now, end of the story, we have this amazing land. It produced these beautiful fruits. And wow, here they are. I've brought them to the Kohen at the temple. So the Mishnah says some farmers are not able to participate in the second aspect of the mitzvah of mikra bikurim. What's an example? Elu mevi'in velo korin. Okay, so some people bring the bikurim, but they can't do the mikra bikurim. So one example is Hager, a convert to Judaism, mevi ve'enu kara. So he could bring his bikurim, but he can't say the mikra bikurim. She'eno yachal lomar asher nishba Hashem la'avotenu latet lanu, because one of the psukim that the convert that the farmer says is who gave us this that Hashem gave this land, promised this land to our forefathers to give it to us. So the Mishnah says, well, the ger can't say that because his father wasn't Jewish, his grandfather, right? So he can't say with a straight face, he can't honestly say this pasuk. So he's disqualified from this aspect of the Mishnah. Now look what the Rambam says. If you have the source sheet, it's source number 3. I'll pull it up for you. The Rambam writes the following. Okay. The Rambam says, I don't believe in that Mishnah. I have another source in a Gemara in Yerushalmi, and I reject that Mishnah. He says, Hager mevi bekoreh. He says, no. The ger brings the bikurim, and he says the mikra bikurim. And how is he able to say the pasuk that you promised my fathers, but his father wasn't Jewish? So the Rambam says, no. Shenemar la'Avram av hamon goyim netzatifa. Harei hu av kol ha'ulam. Kol ha'ulam kulo shenichnasim tachas kanfi ashti. It's so beautiful. The Rambam says, Abraham is the father of all people who came under the wings of God's presence. Anyone who's a member of the Jewish people, your father's Jewish, your mother's Jewish, not Jewish, convert, born Jewish, doesn't matter. If you become Jewish or you are Jewish, whatever the case may be, you're a child of Abraham. What does it mean to be a child of Abraham? It has nothing to do with genetics. It has nothing to do with biology. To be a child of Abraham means to be a student of Abraham. It means that you've accepted the values that Abraham taught to his children and their children and so on. To be a child of Abraham is not about biology. To be a child of Abraham means to be someone who's accepted the values of Abraham, because paternity is not about biology. When it comes to Abraham, paternity is about passing down the values of ethical monotheism and eventually the values of the Torah. So this is what we mean when we say that Abraham is Av Hamon Goyim. And I'll go a little out of order, but we all know the famous Rashi, Es Hanefesh Asher Asu Becharan. What does it mean? The individuals, the people that Abraham made in Haran. So these were the converts, right? Abraham proselytized and recruited the men, and Sarah proselytized and recruited the women, and together they brought people under the wings of God's religion, of the knowledge of ethical monotheism, and they became functionally students of Abraham and Sarah, and they became Jewish. So I'll just say one more word about this, and then I'll pause for a second to take any questions or comments about this approach. but I think there's one exception. Um, that's there's one prominent exception before we get to Abraham of someone who is described specifically as a father, and that is in the story of the aftermath of the flood. Remember that very problematic, uncomfortable story. Noah is intoxicated, he's in his tent, and who sees Noah exposed? So the Torah says, who sees him? Cham, right? Cham sees Noah exposed, and Cham is referred to as Cham hu avi Canaan. And everyone wants to know, he's the father of Canaan. What does that have to do with the price of tea in China? So maybe Canaan told him it. Maybe, or maybe the Torah wants us to know that Cham is the father of Canaan in the sense that whenever we meet Canaan in the rest of Tanakh, it's always synonymous with sexual immorality, sexual impropriety. If you want to know where it came from, so it's not genetic, but we know the story of Cham, who Avi Canaan. We know the story of sexual impropriety in the previous generation. And if there's one thing that he did communicate to his son, so it was this, and somehow the apple didn't fall far from the tree, that Canaan became synonymous with immorality, was somehow, the Torah wants us to know, was somehow a function of his having been educated, right, by his father Cham, who was himself guilty of some kind of sexual offense. Okay. So let me pause here and just ask if there are any questions or comments before we return to attempt to solve some of the questions that that I brought up a few minutes ago. Any questions or comments? Feel free to unmute or just jump right in. Okay, so let's jump back for a second to Lech Lecha and to this well-known introduction to Abraham. What is the command? What is the command to go forth? Okay, Lech Lecha mi'artzecha mi'moladtecha mibeis avich. So let's learn a couple of sources together. First, just to give you a kind of foil or a counterpoint, I'll show you a comment of Rabbeinu Bechaye, which I think is interesting. Rabbeinu Bechaye writes the following. I'll see if I can pull it up on the screen. This is source number 5. So Rabbeinu Bechaye says, "Kach haya Abraham dar b'soch ovdei avodah zara. Amar LaKadosh Baruch Hu, lech lecha hisrachek mehem, v'al tislach lech imahem." So there's a kind of play on words that Rabbeinu Bechaye has here, and it's based on midrashic teaching. He says, "Lech lecha," I want you to leave this place, this land of pagans, this land of idolaters, and distance yourself from them, and the al tislach lech imahem. You see, like the words, the last 4 words of tislach lech are lech lecha. Okay, those last words, lech, if you read it together, so do not, right? It should be a going for you, but it should not make you. What does you say? Al tislach lech imahem. Don't become sullied by your interactions with the pagans. There's a bracha that we say in Shemona Esrei every day based on the pasuk, which says Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam magen Avraham. Okay. So blessed is Hashem, the shield of Abraham. So do you ever stop and think about that for a second? Why does Abraham need a shield? Of all the characters that we know from Tanakh, right? Abraham is, I would say, the one who doesn't need a shield, right? He's forms alliances, and he's out in the world, and he has an army, and he wins battles, and there's military victories. Why does Abraham need a magen? Why do we need Hashem to protect Abraham? Abraham's good to go. Magen Abraham, part of the challenge of being Abraham of educating the world and being an Av Hamon Goyim and bringing everyone under the wings of the Shekhinah and bringing them literally and figuratively into his tent means that he's exposed. So, like, you have that expression, you lie down with dogs, you stand up with fleas, something like that. But if there's too much, exposure and there's too much interaction between Abraham and people with the wrong kinds of values, so that's a problem. And the challenge is that you might somehow become tainted, become sullied by some of that exposure. So Lech Lecha, the Rabbeinu B'chaya is reading it as a kind of bracha, right? It should be for you, your future, right? However much you end up interacting with people who are not like you, right? The bracha of Lech Lecha is that it should be for you, and you should be protected from ever being tainted from the interactions that you undergo in the course of your prophetic career, in the course of your professional career. I just want to keep that in mind as a kind of foil to a medrash that I want to share with you, which I find very very beautiful. And I think it's quite evocative and quite powerful. This is source number 6 on the sheet. Lech lecha Rabbeinu berachya l'reach shmanecha tovim shemin torah shema. So that's the pasuk. The medrash often begins with a drasha, with an exegesis based on a pasuk intent. So, Amar Rabbeinu Barach, Lama haya Abraham Avinu dam. To what can Abraham Avinu be compared? Litzluchis shel, I don't know how to say this. Apu plisimon, mukefes tzamid pesil munachas bezabis below haya reichon. Abraham can be compared to a container of perfume, which is hermetically sealed and placed in the corner of a cellar, and no one can smell it. Once you start shaking it around and moving it about, and you unstop it, everyone smells the sweet perfume. That's the comparison. That's the mashal. That's the metaphor. That's Abraham. That's what Hashem said to Abraham. Tel atzmecha. Start moving from place to place, so that your name will become great in the world. Lech lecha, get going. I would translate Lech lecha based on this medrash as, rather than you should go, as if this is a one-time command, I would translate it and say something like, Abraham, I command you to be a goer. I command you to be on the move. Lech lecha, for you, going should be a perpetual state. And you see it, right? If you ask someone, stop a day school kid on the street and say, where did Abraham live? So you ask 10 kids, you'll get 10 different answers. Where did Abraham live? Abraham lived in Hebron, and Abraham lived in Beersheba, and Abraham lived in Elonei Mamre, and Abraham lived in Beit El, and right on, right? Because he was never in one place. He starts out in Haran, he goes to Canaan. As soon as he gets to Canaan, by the way, he can't stay there, and he ends up having to go to Mitzrayim, right? Anytime he ever gets someplace, he ends up having to move. He's in constant motion. He's in perpetual motion. There's even a word which is sort of untranslatable, vaye'ehal. Right? Like if you really wanted to be literal about translating that word, which comes up in the context of Abraham, you would say he tented. But we have no such word in the English language, because what we're really saying is that he kept pitching his tent and rolling up his tent, and he moved from one place, then he moved to the next place, and every place he ended up was temporary, where we would describe Abraham as a nomad. And what I think this medrash is getting at is precisely this point that Hashem's commandment of Lech Lecha was the command to be perpetually on the move. And this is part of the goal, and this is part of the mission, to take the show on the road. And again, this comes back to Bes HaNefesh Asher Asu B'Haran. The goal is, Abraham, you can't just be in the basement of a monastery contemplating ethical monotheism. You need to be out there making sure that you spread the message and that people have exposure to this message. What's amazing to notice, what's really amazing to notice, and we'll get to this, eventually, is when we'll get there sooner in the weekly parsha. When we get to Parshas Chayei Sarah, and Abraham is forced into the position of negotiating a burial plot for his beloved wife with the Bnei Chetz. So, who's he negotiating with? We don't know these people, right? They're a bunch of, who could they possibly be? A bunch of pagans living in the ancient Near East. And what do they say to him? They say, Nesi Elokim ata betochenu. They recognize that he is a godly man, that he's a priestly man, even forgetting about the people that he converted and the people that he brought into his tent. The average citizen, the regular folks, all recognize that this was fill in the blank, a godly person, a God-fearing person, a moral person, an ethical person, a person of character, a person of integrity. Somehow, he just radiated that sense that he was connected to some greater knowledge, to the knowledge of Hashem, and everyone knew it, whether they believed or didn't believe. And that, I think, is what the Medrash is telling us is captured in this formulation. Abraham, you got to take it on the road. It's not enough, It's not enough for you to have it or to know it or to have a little shtipel where you have a few students. No, you need to shout it from the rooftops and spread the message of ethical monotheism far and wide. And again, I don't want to get too far afield, but there's obviously different streams in Jewish philosophy as far as particularism and universalism and insularity. And 1948 is the first time in a long time that the Jewish people have had sovereignty and have had the kind of wherewithal to even begin thinking about sharing a message. For the last 2,000 years, most of the time we're just trying to make it to the next generation without suffering another pogrom. So all that being said, there is a message here that goes way back to the beginning of Judaism that says, this is part of what it means to be a descendant of Abraham, is to be someone who radiates the sense of what it means to be all these things, a person of abiding integrity that comes from being in a relationship with Hashem. Okay, let me just share one final comment about Lech Lecha. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs's Yortzeit is next week, and I want to share with you a beautiful little comment that Rabbi Sachs has, and because his words are so poetic, I want to share them in their original. This is source number 7 on your source sheets. Rabbi Sachs writes the following. He says, Lech Lecha in this sense means being prepared to take on an often lonely journey. Go by yourself. To be a child of Abraham is to have the courage to be different, to challenge the idols of the age, whatever the idols and whichever the age. In an era of polytheism, it meant seeing the universe as the product of a single creative will and therefore not meaningless, but coherent and meaningful. In an era of slavery, it meant refusing to accept the status quo in the name of God, but instead challenging it in the name of God. When power was worshipped, it meant constructing a society that cared for the powerless, the widow, the orphan, the stranger, during centuries in which the mass of mankind was sunk in ignorance. It meant honoring education as the key to human dignity and creating schools to provide universal literacy. When war was the test of manhood, it meant striving for peace. In ages of radical individualism like today, it means knowing that we are not what we own, but what we share, not what we buy, but what we give. That there is something higher than appetite and desire, namely the call that comes to us as it came to Abraham from outside ourselves, summoning us to make a contribution to the world. So there's another dimension that Rabbi Sachs is identifying in the formulation of Lech Lecha, that there's something personal and there's something lonely about this mission. And you see it in the life of Abraham. You know, he had this entourage, but like, how much did they help him? Whenever we meet Abraham, so we meet Abraham kind of, you know, he's either with Sarah or he's by himself, but it's either him or the two of them. Like, it's not a clan, it's not an army, it's not a group. So there is a sense that, right, that this mission of Abraham, to be a child of Abraham, means to be, countercultural. It means to be that you're going to have to swim against the tide. You're going to be in the minority. You're not going to be the prevailing voice, and that's going to feel lonely. And that's been, right, the Jewish story for thousands of years, and it continues to be the story today. So, you know, how many values, and again, I'm not going to make this a political discussion, but, you know, open up the newspaper on any day of the week, and we would say, Judaism says the exact opposite. We would never, again, fill in the blank, whatever it happens to be. The rest of the world is marching along, and they think, right, you know, the day is night and night is day, and here we are, right, with our Torah. And it's going to be a minority voice, right? And sometimes you feel it more, and sometimes you feel it less. But these messages, right, that Abraham is championing in his time are, right, a voice in the wilderness, and, you know, in many, if not most, epochs in human history, they're a voice in the wilderness, as Rabbi Sachs puts it so beautifully. Okay, so let me just pause here for a second and ask if there are any questions about Lech Lecha and the sense of the lonely mission of Abraham, taking that mission on the road and bringing a sense of ethical monotheism to the masses.
Can you fix the sound?
I'm sorry, Reva, go ahead.
Yeah, can you fix the sound?
Is the sound not?
It's
not
low.
It's low. Let me see if I can improve it. I apologize if it's hard to hear. Seconds. I think that's the best I'm going to get. I apologize. I'll speak loud. Okay, and hopefully we can resolve it by next time. All right. In the time that we have left, I want to see if we can wrap up some of the remaining issues that I raised. Okay, so what's left on our list? Goy Gadol. Right? What does it mean that God promised Abraham that he would be a great nation? We know from thousands of years of Jewish history, the Jewish people have never been great from a quantitative perspective. So maybe you say, okay, you know, you don't have to get so hot and bothered by this. You know, like in English, the word great could mean great quantitatively, maybe it means great qualitatively. And maybe Hashem means you'll be a great nation in the sense that you'll achieve great things and you'll be morally great and so on. So I'll just share with you a medrash, which you have in source number 8, that actually ties the word greatness. And I think this is why it's so moving, not just kind of in a poetic sense, but it says the word great is actually attached to the Torah itself. So the medrash in source number 8 says, L'goy gadol sheten levanecha es haTorah. What does it mean that you're going to be great? You're going to be great by virtue of your children receiving the Torah. Umimenu yikru goy gadol. And that's how you're going to become a great nation. Shneimar rak am chacham ben avon hagoy hagadol hazeh. It's when you receive the Torah that you achieve greatness, right? And already the Torah is signaling to us that Hashem's promise for Abraham for all time is that his greatness will be bound up in the fact that his great grandchildren are going to receive the Torah. Okay. The last couple points I want to make have to do with this sense of bracha. Right? So, what does it mean to be a bracha and to be a source of bracha? What does it mean to be a blessing? So Rashi famously says that to be a blessing is monetary, it's financial, it's material. That you'll be blessed with material blessing in this world. But I want to share with you a less well-known part of the Rashi. You can see it in source number 9. He says, "V'nibrechu b'cha," you'll be blessed. Yesh agadot rabot. There are many midrashic interpretations of this line. V'zeu pshuto, but I want to tell you what it really means. It says, "Adam omer lebeno tehei ke'Avraham." What does it mean that you'll be a blessing? It means that you will be a role model. People will point to you and they'll say to their kids, "I hope one day you grow up to be Avraham." That's what it means to be a blessing. That people should look at you and say, "I want my kids to be just like that." And Rashi says the best proof is from the bracha that we give our kids. We say, what's the bracha? Yevarech Hashem v'yishmerecha. What's the bracha we give our kids? Yasim chalim ke'Ephraim v'chem Menashe. I want you to be like Ephraim and Menashe. Lots of reasons, which we don't have to get into right this second, as to why they are the role models. But whatever the reason is, right? The point is that bracha means you should be like, A, B, and C. And that is that's a beautiful sense of what we can aspire to when we say it should be a bracha, right? That someone should be held out as a role model for other people. I'll just share with you on that note one last thought about bracha, which comes from the Sforno. It's just so simple and so elegant and so beautiful. He says, you know what the bracha is? Source number 10. Birkas Hashem hi. What is the bracha of Hashem? You know what it means? Yismach Hashem b'maasav. Hashem should be happy with your actions. If a person can go to bed at night and say, "Yeah, Hashem's proud of me," if you can check that box, so you're blessed. That's what meaning is. That's what satisfaction is. That's where it comes from, right? It's not external. It comes from the knowledge that I've acted in the right way, that I've behaved in the right way, that I've made a kiddush Hashem, again, whatever the case may be, but that Hashem can look at me and say, Hashem is happy with the way I've acted. Hashem is happy with the way I've behaved. That is a bracha. That is, in fact, a very big deal. Okay. I think the last question that we had from the opening psukim with which we began, and this will circle us back to where we started last week. The Torah tells us, if you go back to the psukim, so the very last pasuk that we read. So let me just pull it up on the screen for us. The Torah says. Torah says, so Abraham and his entourage headed toward Canaan, and they came to Canaan. So if he was headed to Canaan, isn't it obvious that he got to Canaan? So the point is, right, and this just kind of emphasizes what we talked about last week, that Abraham is individuated. There was another person who set out to get to Canaan, but he didn't get there. There was someone else about whom the Torah says he headed to Canaan, but he didn't end up in Canaan. Who's that person? That's Abraham's father. That's Terah. right? He wanted to get to Canaan. He left Ur Kasdim, but he only made it as far as Haran, right? He never made it to Canaan. So the Torah is now telling us that in this moment, Abraham ended up living the unlived dream of the previous generation of his own father, right? His father wanted to get there, he never did. Now Abraham sets out to get there, and he actually gets there. And now the story can begin in earnest because Abraham has individuated. He has become his own person, right? It's not an accident that the Torah has ended the story of Terach, right? Even though he's technically alive and well all this time, living nice retirement life in scenic Haran. The point is that we can end that story because this is a new beginning. And again, to begin to finish where I began, this is the beginning of Avraham Avinu, Av Hamon Goyim, the father of nations, and Avraham, who gives us a new definition of fatherhood, a new definition of paternity. He's the character who tells us that paternity means teaching and imparting your values to the next generation. And once you do that, you're a father of all people, irrespective of whether or not you've genetically, biologically created them. It doesn't matter. As a nefesh asher hasu b'charan, you can create people, right? The Gemara even says, right, if you teach someone Torah, you become their father, right? So what is that about? Is that a metaphor? No, we get that from Abraham, right? That's exactly how he functioned. He became Avraham Avinu by virtue of the fact that he was the teacher par excellence. Okay, so I'm going to stop here. We're actually not going to meet next week. We have a special program that we're running in conjunction with Lincoln Square Synagogue, both live and live streaming. It's from 7 to 8:30 in memory of Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Rabbi Schachter speaking, Dr. Erica Brown is speaking, a wonderful lineup of speakers to learn the Torah of Rabbi Sachs and to remember him on his first yahrzeit. So because we're co-sponsoring, this class won't meet so as not to conflict, and we'll pick up with this class in 2 weeks, but I hope that you'll all join us next week. We'll send out, of course, the live stream information, but you can register online for that special program. Okay, so that's all that I want to share this evening, but I'm happy to stay on and take questions and comments now.